Do we have to tithe? And what is it? I got the question, so let's talk about it. So the first time the concept of tithing is even mentioned in the Bible is in Genesis 14:18. Abram, later named Abraham, is returning from battle. He is blessed by King Melchizedek, and so he gives him a tenth of everything that he received from battle as the first tithe that was ever documented. So in the Old Testament, you'll find that tithe was used for multiple reasons, but mainly for the upkeep of God's kingdom. For instance, the Levites, they were the priests. They weren't allowed to go out and have other jobs. Their sole purpose was being the priests. And so they would receive a tithe for being ministers. That's why today, pastors and ministers do receive a little tithe or a little pay for their works. These tithes were also used for temple maintenance and upkeep. So these worship areas had to be kept clean. And so that's what this tithe would go towards. Tithes were also used to help the poor and the needy. There was no government assistance back then. So if it wasn't for like the churches and religious leaders, a lot of people had to sell themselves into slavery just to live and eat. And the most important part of tithing was the spiritual obedience and the covenant that you had between God. You see, the Israelites would take the first tenth of their earnings and they would give it to God as an act of obedience. And this was something that was with a covenant between God and the Israelites. So in essence, tithing was not just a practical means of helping those in need, upkeep for the kingdom, and helping those priests who could not work. It also was a means for a spiritual obedience to show God that whatever I make, I'm going to give you the first tenth of that because it is yours, and because of you, I am allowed to have what I have. So you're probably asking yourself, like, my buddy goes to a church, they take tithe. My church doesn't. The church down the street does, and so on and so forth. What you'll find is this confusion about the concept of tithe. So here's the truth. Tithing was a law in the Old Covenant of the Bible of the Old Testament. We now fall under the New Covenant, which is under grace, under Jesus Christ, who came to fulfill, not get rid of, but to fulfill the old laws that we were held to. So in the New Testament, Jesus now pushes grace and love. And so instead of looking at it like this, oh my gosh, I got to make certain that I meet this 10% threshold, Jesus says, give what you can. If it's 1%, you give that. If it's 20%, you give that. We don't want to hold ourselves to a specific number. The rules and the laws of the Old Covenant were very specific because it was kingdom building. Now that the Christ has come, we now are held to our hearts. And so no, in short, tithing is not a specific thing that you have to do, but Jesus encourages all of us to be a cheerful giver and to give generously. So don't fall victim to anyone saying that you have to give this, you have to do this, you have to do that. That was the old law. Now we're under grace. And if you want to be blessed by giving, you make certain that when you do give, you give it from your heart because you want to give it, not because you're like, oh my gosh, I need to pay for this house, I need this house, I want this house, so let me start tithing because I want something. You tithe out of obedience to God to show God that no matter whether I have a lot or a little, I'm going to give to the kingdom because I love you. So no, you don't have to tithe. There's no 10% or anything that you have to give. But I will say, if you get into the level of obedience of tithing and understanding what it means to be a cheerful giver and give from your heart, you will truly start to see God work and move in your life in miraculous ways because God will bless your heart if it is in the right position. This is Eric Scott with the Lions Faith Podcast. If you ask the questions, I'll give you the answers. Thank you guys. I love you. Double tap that screen, like, share, and follow as it helps the content get out to others. You guys stay blessed.